honored to be a part of it, and you've done such a beautiful job. And it is important that we share our experiences. In fact, I had no intention of ever writing a book or ever speaking about my experiences at all, until I got that message from Spirit, if you will, that said, share your experience and people will heal. And healing is something that I had done a lot of. And so I had a great deal of empathy when it came to healing, not only physically, but more importantly, emotionally and spiritually, and what that looks like. And it's so fun, to come together and have these conversations and to listen to everybody and to get in touch with where they're coming from, and their experience. I was listening to some music earlier this morning. I saw a little thing on YouTube, and it was Matchbox 20. You remember Matchbox 20? And Rod Thomas, who's the lead singer and kind of the front man there, he was talking about a song that I always loved called 3 a.m. And I always thought it was a love song or a heartbreak song about a crazy girlfriend, in a relationship going bad. But he was sharing that he actually wrote the song about a time when he was 12 years old and his mother was suffering from cancer. And what that was like for him as a young boy barely entering into adolescence to have a mother so sick. And suddenly the lyrics and the words mean something completely different. There's a much deeper level when I get in touch with where someone's coming from. What the desires of their heart are, what their true intentions are. And I was looking at the words this morning while I was listening to everybody speak, and it's the song that starts out. She says it's cold outside and tells me to put on my raincoat, and suddenly you realize, oh my gosh, these are the words of a mother. These are the words of a mother to a young boy who's very ill, and he talks about how she only sleeps when it's raining, and kind of the melody or the chorus or whatever you will says, that she's very, very scared of it all sometimes, but she believes that the rain will wash it away. Now, the backstory is she actually overcame the cancer. She healed from it and is now okay and doing fine. But my whole point in sharing that is just, when we know where somebody's coming from and their motivations, it makes a big, big, big difference. And to sit with my sister-in-law, and this has been a long, long battle for her. It's been 15 years. She had an incredible disease which was deteriorating her brain and also her body, to where she was like a young child, and yet she, was in her 50s, and it was really amazing to watch. But knowing where she was coming from her history and her past, and seeing where she came to was very, very interesting. As then she finally passed. But things like that, based on my experience and where I'm coming from, and I'll share that now, because my near-death experience started 20 years ago, and it was the result of an automobile accident. And the whole family was in the car. It was me, my wife, our two young boys, Spencer, my oldest, who was 7 years old at the time, and then our little toddler, Griffin, who was 14 months at the time. But we were driving from southern Utah. We'd been on a road trip. We had visited family. We were seeing all the sights. And I lost control of the car. And that's a part of the story that took a while for me to address, because of the guilt, because of what had taken place. I'm not positive what happened, but to the best of my recollection, I dozed off. I just dozed off briefly, and I swerved to the right, and I overcorrected to the left. And as a result, lost control of the car, and it began to roll. It began to roll, not off the road, but down the road at a speed of 75 miles an hour. I had set the cruise control at 75. And I think some of the interesting things leading up to that, may have been the moments before that all happened. There seems to be these times in life where you look back and it's like time seems to stand still. It's like things just freeze. And I had some moments like that before having lost control of the vehicle, where I was simply glancing in the rearview mirror. Had the cruise control set. I'm driving down the road, and I glance in the rearview mirror, and just to check traffic. But that's when I saw my two sons in the back seat. And Griffin, my toddler, was sound asleep in his car seat. He had already fallen asleep. And yet all the busyness around me, it's like time stood still, and suddenly I saw him in this different light. I saw him for the beautiful soul that he was. I mean, we were told we may never have additional children, and he was kind of our miracle baby. And as I glanced and saw him there, details became very, very evident. I mean, I noticed how long his eyelashes were and what a beautiful, beautiful child he was. And I also glanced at Spencer, who was in the back seat, 7 years old, and he was playing with action figures, and he was a Star Wars nut. And so he was having the grandest lightsaber battle, in the entire universe. And I also glanced over at my wife, who had also reclined her seat back and was fast asleep, but she was still holding my hand. And I got in touch with how grateful I was for her, what a gift she was in my life. And here again, this was everyday things. This was before the accident happened. I'm just flying down the road and glance in the rearview mirror, but there are those moments in life that become sacred. It's like time stands still, and you have a different awareness, a different consciousness. And based on that, I've come to really embrace the fact that every moment is sacred, that every moment in life is a gift. And yet, having had that little experience and glancing in the rearview mirror and seeing the boys and noticing my wife and really being in my heart for a few seconds, it was about an hour after that the accident happened. And as I say, I dozed off. I lost control of the car. We began to roll, and I blacked out for most of that. But I was fully conscious when the car came to a stop. And the first thing I heard was my 7-year-old in the back seat crying hysterically. I heard him crying, and I thought, wow, I've got to get to my son. I've got to get to my son. And that's when I realized I could not move. I mean, I was pinned, and I couldn't tell whether it was to the floorboard or the seat. And I had no idea of my injuries, actually. All I knew is I wanted to get to my son. What had actually happened is that both of my legs had been crushed, and, they were badly, badly damaged. My back had been damaged. My lungs were collapsing. My right arm had been torn very bad and nearly torn off. And then the seatbelt had cut through my midsection and ruptured all my insides. I had no idea. All I knew is that we had crashed the car and my son was crying and I wanted to get to him. And yet it was in hearing him cry that I suddenly realized that no one else was crying. And that was the darkest hell I may ever experience. I mean, here I was, I knew we had crashed. My initial reaction was, oh, good, he's okay. But when I realized that neither Griffin nor Tamara were crying or making any noise, that's when I saw and realized that they were gone. I mean, that they had been killed. And it was such a deep awareness beyond just knowing and experiencing it. I felt it. I felt it at the deepest core, like my heart had been ripped out. It's like, how can this be? And there was an absolute panic. It's like, oh, I've got to, can I rewind? Can I take those 3 seconds back? I've got to go back. This has got to be a nightmare. This has got to be a bad dream. It was absolute overwhelming panic and fear and regret and guilt. And I mean, I can't, there aren't really words to express the feelings of a father. I mean, gosh, tomorrow's Father's Day, you know, and here I was the father, the protector, the provider, the one that was to take care of my family, and I had lost control of the car. And there we were, you know, scattered at the side of the road, and I couldn't move, and I could barely speak, and I have this 7-year-old crying hysterically, and I don't share all that to be morbid or graphic, simply to set the stage for what happened next, because as I was in that absolute darkest place, suddenly there was calm and light came. And when I say light came, it's like I felt it. And many have alluded to this. I felt this light come to me and surround me and be around me, and almost as if it was comforting me in the darkest moment of my life. And it felt as if I was rising above the scene of the accident. And I wasn't quite sure what to think. I thought, wow, what's happening? Am I okay? That was my initial thought, is, oh, am I okay? Am I okay? What's happening? Am I all right? Suddenly I could breathe. You know, the pain was gone. I thought, well, what's going on? I'm okay. I'm really okay. And as I began to get in touch with that, I looked over and realized that Tamra, my wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene. And, you know, I'm gonna share a little detail of that. And I have shared this before, but what had happened is, because Tamra's seat was reclined, she had suffered some pretty severe head trauma. The restraint couldn't hold her properly with her seat reclined, and I knew that at the scene of the accident. And yet, in this light, in this peace, there she was, and she was perfect. She was beautiful. There was no trauma. There was nothing like what I had experienced just moments ago at the scene. She was absolutely glorious and beautiful and okay too. And I kept thinking, wow, we're okay. We're okay. And yet that's when she began to communicate with me. Now, she was, in my experience, communicating verbally, but there was all this nonverbal, energy, communication, if you will, coming at me about, no, you've got to go back. You've got to go back. You can't come. You can't be here. You've got to go back. And that was an interesting moment too, because I learned a lot about choice. They're looking at the woman I loved more than life, and yet knowing I had a little boy crying in the back seat of that car, I made a choice. And it was deeper than just making a decision. There was this overwhelming sense that the only cosmic law in the entire universe is that of free will and choice. I got to choose. And I chose to come back. Looking at her and seeing her urgency of, no, you can't come, you've got to go back. And then realizing I had that little boy, Spencer, in the backseat of the car. I made a choice, and it was as easy as a thought. It's not like I had to swim or fly or figure out, what to do. As soon as I made the choice, I actually found myself wandering, moving around freely, going about a hospital, a level 1 trauma center. And that was incredibly profound as well. Now, our next guest, Dr. O'Driscoll, was my level 1 trauma doc, and he's going to share a little bit of his experience. But what my experience was in that event, and I had no idea, I had no sense of time about being in this light bubble. All I knew is I had wrecked the car. I had said the most profound goodbye I was ever going to say, and then I was suddenly presenced in this level 1 trauma hospital. But what had actually happened is people had arrived on the scene. One of the people on the scene was actually a physician. They had seen to us. They had taken care of things the best they could. They had rushed me to a little local hospital. The local hospital knew that they could do nothing for me there, and that's when I was life flighted to this level 1 trauma center, the closest one that they had, which was in Salt Lake City. I had no idea of any of that. We had crashed. I had said this profound goodbye, and now I was wandering about the hospital. And everyone I saw, I mean, the patients, the doctors, the nurses, the families of the patients, everyone in this busy setting, I saw them and I knew them absolutely perfectly. I mean, everyone I saw, I knew their love, I knew their hate, I knew their motivations and pains and fears and everything that had happened. In fact, I was feeling their lives as if it was my life. I felt their abuse. I felt their anxiety. I felt their anticipation. I felt their joy. I felt every emotion as if it was my own emotion. And I had this overwhelming sense of unconditional love. I mean, and it didn't matter who they were or what they had done or what they hadn't done. I mean, everything from the heroin addict to, the saintly grandmother, they were absolutely beautiful and divine. And in fact, I had so much love, I wanted to embrace them. I was experiencing them in such a oneness, such a connection that it was overwhelming. And I continued to do this until I came to a body that I didn't feel anything from. And I thought, well, that's odd, this body laying on the gurney. And I stepped closer only to realize that that's me. That was my body. And yet it wasn't me. I was having this incredible experience. That was the part that was me, but there was my body. And I knew I had to get back in. And again, that was as quick and as natural as a thought. I'm going back in. But this experience, this connection, this experiencing folks, and I get a sense that when we leave the body, when we do pass, when we do, I like to refer to the body as the veil. I think this body is what holds us in forgetfulness and in darkness sometimes of who we truly are. And in experiencing everyone in the hospital in this great divine light and recognition, I got in touch with how divine we really are, and how precious life truly is, and that was quite a tutorial. But as I came to my own body and knew I was going to get back in, again, as soon as I made that choice, as soon as I had that thought, boom, then I'm back in the body. And boy, the heaviness and the pain and the emotions, the guilt, the grief, all of that returned in such a way that it was so heavy and so dense. And of course, I was ventilated. They had a big, tube down my throat doing the breathing from my lungs. My legs were immobile. My arm was immobile. They eventually tied down my left arm because I kept grabbing at all the medical equipment and what have you. But there was some interesting things that happened during that time because I was having these conversations with my deceased wife about having to go back. And I was in the hospital for months and had, I think, in total 18 surgeries before I was ever pieced back together. But in those early stages, there was interesting things going on. I seemed to have one foot in this realm and one foot in the next realm for weeks, if not months or more, where I was having communication with the other side. My wife would let me know things. She would teach me things. And I would experience the hospital staff, doctors and nurses in such a different way. I would feel their soul, regardless of what they looked like. And gosh, that was kind of interesting too, because it's not always the physical manifestation of people that really show their glory and their true magnificence. Some of these folks were so beautiful when they would come in to render aid and to serve me. It was unbelievable. And yet, it may not look that way with the physical eyes, looking at the physical body. But wow, what magnificent souls. And I experienced a lot of that. And by the way, feel free to ask questions. I mean, I'm going to keep talking, but if you have questions, put them up there, because I'd love to make this more of a dialogue and kind of get into a conversation rather than the monologue. But the hospital stay was interesting. and I learned a lot. And maybe the most profound experience happened at the end of the hospital stay. Gosh, I was out of ICU. I was out of surgical recovery. I had made some great strides toward healing and getting better. I was actually I was in the rehabilitation unit when I perhaps had the grandest experience of all. And it happened one night. And actually, my younger brother was there. And I should mention that too. I mean, gosh, my family, my brothers, my brothers practically lost their jobs just to be there in the hospital with me, to look after me, to sit with me. And this particular night, my younger brother was there, still sitting. And he knew I had a hard time sleeping. And so he said, I'll sit with you till you fall asleep. And he did so. Let me just address Robin's question. Thank you, Robin, for asking. Robin saying, how can we learn to see people's soul and not their bodies? Wow. How can we learn that? You know, I don't know if it's a way of learning. It might be more of remembering. Often when I'm in judgment, and I still get there sometimes, you know, somebody does something or whatever. I mean, I've been told, and I believe it's true, that the eyes are the windows to the soul. Sometimes if you just look into the eyes of someone, and look beyond the physical manifestation and connect with that part of them that is eternal, that is divine, the physical tends to go away. And sometimes when I just take a moment to look at someone, not at them, but look into them, look into their eyes, look into their soul, and then feel what the message is, feel the connection, that can be profound. Mr. Wiki asks, did you see your toddler on the other side? You know, not initially. And let me touch on that, because I'm actually getting to an experience I had with him as I begin to share that night my brother was with me. But Griffin, my toddler, and this is also a very painful thing to talk about. In the accident, he was in a car seat. He was secured. The car seat broke. And let him out. And he was ejected from the vehicle. And I knew that at the scene. I knew that he had been thrown from the car. And I didn't see him on the other side when I had the interaction with my wife. It was only she and I, and she was emphatic that I go back. But on this particular night, when my younger brother was there and I was finally in the rehabilitation unit and I was finally sleeping on my side, I had finally gotten to the point where I could sleep on my side. With the abdominal injuries, we'd had to leave the wounds open, and they'd been packing the wounds, and there was severe infections and all kinds of issues going on. Not to mention, I mean, they had to amputate my left leg above the knee. They were attempting to repair the shoulder. The muscles had been torn and the nerves damaged so bad. They were doing some shock therapy, trying to regenerate the nerves into the muscle. There was all kinds of injuries, but I was finally stable enough to lay on my side, and that seemed like the natural way to sleep. In fact, I had laid on my back so long, I had worn all the hair off the back of my head. The back of my head was bald. And my brother was giving me a bad time about that, because he was beginning to lose his hair. And he says, hey, now you're going as bald as I am. And, you know, I mean, it's good to have the camaraderie of siblings. But this particular night, I rolled on my side and I fell sound asleep. And I realized, wow, I'm sleeping. I mean, it felt like it had been months, you know, since I had naturally rolled on my side and gone to sleep, and it felt so good. And as I fell into this deep, deep sleep and actually realized, wow, I'm resting, I felt that light again. That light that had come at the scene of the accident, I felt that light come and embrace me, and it felt as if I was raising above the hospital bed. And I thought, oh, what love. I mean, it's like the light was tangible. It's like it was comforting me. And as I rose above and thought, oh my goodness, the light seemed to dispel and go away, and I was in the most gorgeous, beautiful place. And, people say heaven or the other side or the spirit realms, or I don't care what name you put on it. The only word that I can put on it that even comes close to describing it was, I was home. I was finally home. It's like, oh, I'm home. And I was so happy. I was so joyful. I began to run. I actually began to run now with only one leg, and the only leg I do have is all banged up. There's 6 pins in a plate holding it together. But in this experience, I was physically running. And I say physical for lack of a better word. It was such a sensual experience. I could feel everything as if in the body, but as if not with 5 senses, but 50 senses. I mean, I could feel the ground under my feet. I could feel the sensation of the soft, warm ground and the energy firing up through my thighs and running and just joyfully thinking, wow, I'm home, I'm home, I'm home. And then I got the message that I wasn't there to stay. Just, you're not here to stay. And about that same time, I realized there was this corridor off to my left. And I knew intuitively I'm to go down that corridor. I'm to go that way. And so I did. I made my way down that. And to answer your question, as I did, at the end of that corridor was a crib. And I raced to that crib and I looked in, and there was my little boy. There was my little toddler, Griffin. And he was as peaceful as he had been as when I glanced in the rearview mirror. And as a father, gosh, I just swept him up in my arms and I held him. And I must emphasize, it felt so physical. I could feel his body against mine. I could feel his ribs, expanding with breath. I could feel his warm breath on my neck. I could feel his soft head on my face. And I thought, how can this be? How can this be? And I would ask a question, and someone else referred to this like it's like I knew the answer. What I was told is all spirit is matter. Everything's tangible. It's just at a higher vibration, at a different level. It's more refined. And I thought, oh my goodness, I could feel him almost like I could feel every ounce of light and intelligence in every cell of his being. And yet I realized, well, gosh, if I'm out of the body, it can't be a body. It was confusing, and yet it made so much sense to me. It's like, oh, it's just a higher vibration. Now, I don't know if I can say, well, yeah, he was a little toddler in heaven, but I know the love of the universe. And somewhere in this divine order, as I went into those realms and found him and picked him up, the universe was simply kind enough to allow me to hold my little boy as a little boy, as I knew him. And as I held him, I began to weep. I just thought, how can this be? Do I really get to say goodbye? This is so unbelievable and yet so real. I mean, this life, this is the weird, cloudy dream. That was so real and so super real, if you will. And as I held him and smelled his hair and just marveled at the fact that there I was with him, I did feel a presence come up behind me, a magnificent presence, an overwhelming presence. And I began to be fearful, actually. What I knew is I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in the presence of God. I mean, this presence was so wise, so powerful, so cosmic, so big, and I felt it coming closer, and it's funny that the thought I had, because here I was holding my little boy, and I knew that he had left this world based on me losing control of the car and having a crash, and I began to feel twinges of guilt, like, ooh, gosh, is this my fault? Is this all because of my mishap? And my thought as I felt this beautiful, magnificent presence coming up behind me was, I hope I'm forgiven. Well, as I held my little boy and as I had that thought, I felt these magnificent, beautiful arms wrap around and hold me. And the message came very clearly, there is nothing to forgive. Everything is in perfect divine order. And as that took place, it's almost like my little boy became part of me, and I became part of God. In fact, it's as if I began to see everything as if I was God. I mean, suddenly I saw everything. I saw my whole life. I saw the divorce of my parents. I saw things I had done. I began to have the thoughts again saying, oh, no, that was a mistake. That was a mistake. And yet in those divine arms, the message was there are no mistakes. I mean, I saw things that I had done wrong, and I knew they were wrong, and I did it anyway. And yet in those arms, the message was coming, not even verbally, just penetrating through me. That's your judgments of it, not ours. We love you. You're perfect. You are divine. You are part of all of it. In fact, as I was experiencing this and thinking, wow, who am I? The clear message, or the clear words, if you will, and yet it wasn't words in my ears, it was words through my entire consciousness, were the words, I am that I am. And I thought, you mean I am that I am? We're all connected. We're all part of this great oneness, which is so divine. And it was so overwhelming. And there was so much love. There are not words for the love. I talked about free will and choice perhaps being the only cosmic rule, if there are rules. But boy, I'll tell you what I experienced was so much love. Perhaps there's a law of love where everything was love. My whole life was about love. And I used to believe that God had done these things, that perhaps I was being tested, that God would see how I'd react. I grew up in a conservative Christian home, and yet in those arms, I realized that life was not a test. It was an absolute gift. And I also got in touch with the fact that it wasn't done to me, it was done for me, or in fact, I had actually created it. Nobody was doing it to me. I had created my life to experience what I came to experience, and the entire universe. And I say that very consciously. It felt as if the entire universe was supporting my little life for me, because of me, that I had created, and God and the universe were so kind, it said, yes, absolutely. If that's what you want, that's what we'll do. I realized that Tamara and Griffin, my wife and son that had left, that all of that was part of a absolute divine plan that I had actually worked with them to create for me. It became so individual and so powerful. And I got in touch with choice again. I mean, as I came out of that consciousness of being all there is, and then holding my little boy, and we came back to ourselves, and what was communicated to me is that I had a choice. Yes, my son had passed, and yes, I was there with him, but I had a choice on how I would experience it. I could choose to feel as if I was a victim, that God had done this to me, and I could be angry the rest of my life. I could experience the guilt. I could feel guilty for the rest of my life and beat myself up because I was driving the car. Or in this perfect moment, I could actually choose to give my son, to give him a way to exercise my will, my choice, to give my son to God, and my wife as well, if I chose to, and therefore consciously make a different choice and not feel put upon. And in all that beauty and all that peace and in all that joy, I was able to kiss my little boy, and I gave him back. And then I woke up in the hospital bed, back to the amputation, the pain, the surgeries, all of it. But I had a little different perspective. And it was never easy. I mean, I think coming back into this realm, and that's what I would love to spend the rest of the time on. I mean, gosh, a profound near-death experience, so personal to me. I never thought I would ever share it. And now that, and Knowing is the new book, single word title, Knowing. You can get it on Amazon or you can get it on Barnes and Noble. I would love for you to read it and give feedback. And it's simply my experience. That's what I've been asked to share. And yet it goes into the next 20 years of my life, where additional miracles happened. I mean, I was able to heal, to learn to walk, to come home. And that was interesting. I was so worried about my 7-year-old, Spencer. I mean, he wasn't badly injured in the accident. He basically walked away from it, but he thought he had lost his whole family. And he had gone through the funeral. He had gone, and it was staying in my brother's home with he and his wife and their children. They took him in as if he was one of their own, while I healed in the hospital. And again, it was my brothers. It was my brothers that came to bring me home, and they would literally have to lift me out of the bed and put me in the wheelchair. And they had a little electric wheelchair that I could drive with my one good left hand, because my right arm was all bound up. My left leg was lopped off. My right leg was in a brace, still healing from the damage that was done to it. But my brothers got me home. And as we returned home, they'd put up a ramp, and there was Spencer looking out the window, watching. And I wonder what that was like for him to watch his uncles, my brothers, lift me and put me in that wheelchair. I mean, I'd been the rough and tumble dad that would throw him in the air and run and play, and now it was going to be different. And I thought, he'll never accept me like this. He'll never be able to accept me. And he when he saw me and I was in the chair, he came running out of the house and he ran toward me. And then he did run right past me. He went right by me, and I thought I knew this was going to be tough for him. And I began to make my way up to the ramp and to turn to go in the house. And I just checked to see where he was. And that's when I noticed he had run past me. But he had actually run across the street, and he was knocking on all the neighbors' doors. He was knocking and shouting, "Come out, come out. My dad has made it home. Come out and see my dad." And so, he was rallying the neighbors, and in all my shame and judgment of myself and my own state, he was rallying, to gather everyone to come see me. And he did then run, and he threw himself on my lap, which just about killed me because I still had all the sutures down the middle from fixing the midsection. But the reason I share this is he threw his arms around my neck, and I held him. And we had a funny little exchange. I was putting it on Star Wars terms so that he could comprehend. I said, "Look, it's going to be like this for a while. They're going to make me a really cool Darth Vader leg, and they'll teach me how to walk, but I'm going to be like this for a while. Are you going to be okay with this?" And he held me tighter and kissed me on the face, and he said, "Dad, if you were nothing but a puddle of blood, I would still love you." And we still laugh about that to this day. But the reason I share this is I had a huge realization in that moment. As I sat in a wheelchair, all broken up with one good arm to hold my living son in this realm, I realized that was no less divine than holding my son who had passed in the other realm. I mean, suddenly heaven was right here. There was no place to go. There was nothing to do. Heaven was right here. And that shifted everything. And that's what I'd like to spend the rest of the time talking about is, what do we do now? We've had these near-death experiences, these profound things. And yet, how do we make our lives better? What do we do in the world to make a difference? How do we bring heaven here? Because I spent the next decade homesick. Oh, gosh, there was bouts of depression and hard things. It's like, I just want to go there. Where's all that love? Where's all that connection? And yet, if we bring it, if we create it, there's not such homesickness. I'm going to take a look at these questions.
Yay, that's Gina. What I was going to ask you to do.
Yeah, Gina. Jeff, with your expanded perspective, do you still experience and process grief and trauma in a typically human way? Well, I suppose I experience it in the way I experience it. I mean, with the passing of my sister-in-law, and she had suffered for some time. I was torn on whether to be sad or joyful. I mean, I knew where she was going. I knew what she was experiencing. In fact, when her body, in those pitiful late stages, I knew because I had experienced it that she probably wasn't in her body. She wasn't experiencing herself like that. We were. And it was very difficult. Did I shed tears? Absolutely. Did I hurt for her husband knowing that his wife was moving on? Yeah. I knew how that felt to lose a spouse. And yet what I know is they're never lost. They're never gone. They're literally right here. In fact, they cheer us on. They champion us. So I probably have a much different perspective. I grieve. I cry for me and my loneliness, but for them, I celebrate. For me, it's a beautiful commencement to what's next. And my current wife, and that's another miracle that happened. Gosh, I mean, I got back to work after the accident. Family, neighbors, friends championed around me. I fell in love again. I had a magnificent woman come into my life, and we adopted 2 boys, and I don't even call them adopted. I mean, these sons came to our home in such a miraculous way, and you know, I suppose some people might look at me and think, wow, you're the hard-luck kid, and I sometimes think I may be the most blessed guy on the planet. I mean, to know what I know and to have experienced what I experienced, and even when it comes to grief, yeah, I feel the emotions, but sometimes I think, I thank the entire universe. Wow, thank you for allowing me to feel that, to know what it feels like, to experience that emotion, to experience that thing here in this realm. Because from my perspective, we're only here to learn. And we only learn by experience. So having the experience expands my soul in a way that could be done no other way. Andy, thank you, my friend. Jeff, as a father, I felt a lot of connection and empathy with your talk. You might cover this later, but do you think the accident was part of a pre-birth or soul contract? Did you get the sense that you were given a choice that was designed for you to make? Wow, that's a great question, Andy, and absolutely. I mean, I touched on this, but yes. What I got in touch with is it was my, in fact, I'll share this at one point. In fact, it's when I had met Tanya, my current wife, and that was a miracle in and of itself. But I knew I was beginning to have feelings for her, but I found myself on Tamara's grave, my first wife, bawling and carrying on. You know, I mean, how could you leave me like this? I mean, I was still walking with a cane and attempting to raise Spencer on my own as a single father, and I was sharing with her, how could you leave? I mean, you're in that beautiful place, and I'm here doing this. And as I poured my soul out, literally laying on the grass on top of her gravesite, I swear she came to me. She came to me, and I felt her hands on the back of my shoulders as I knelt there on the grass and wept. And she communicated to me, she said, I loved you enough to leave. I loved you enough to go. Don't you remember? This was all part of the big plan. And I would have much rather stayed and grown old with you, but I loved you enough to go so that you would have the experience that your soul designed for you to grow, to expand, to be. I love you that much. Don't berate me for loving you unconditionally, for loving you enough to play out the experience. And boy, Griffin, the same way. I'm sure that they, do we have contracts? From my perspective, absolutely. Do they play out? Absolutely. Does it mean that things are predestined? Well, maybe, but we always have a choice. I mean, the things are going to happen, but we have a choice into how we're going to experience it. And yet that's where accountability becomes so powerful. How do I choose to experience my life in spite of what happens? Because it's my life that I created for me in some divine realm of eons, to know that I get to do this now so that I know what I know. That's a great question, Andy. Mike, I really feel you, Jeff, and my heart is open wide. My question is, did you have any dreams afterwards or any STEs? Is the pain helping you move forward inward? Oh, Mike, fantastic question. And yes, the continued after-death communication, the dreams, the things that go on. I have angels. I have two very powerful angels that go with me. I'll share very quickly a little dream I had about my toddler. And he came to me, and this was not long ago. And gosh, in this dream, and I call it a dream. I mean, let me be honest, it was a vision. I wasn't even necessarily asleep. I was in that lucid state, but suddenly I began to experience myself as a little child. In fact, I was sitting on the front seat of my dad's pickup truck. I grew up on a farm, and I thought, gosh, I remember this truck. I remember the smell of the truck. I remember the way it was. I remember everything about it, the dashboard. And I looked down, and I was wearing a red corduroy jumpsuit, you know, the kind that snap on the inner thighs to change a toddler. And I thought, oh my gosh, I hated this jumpsuit. Are you kidding me? And I looked at my feet, and my feet had little toddler shoes, the white ones on. And I thought, gosh, I remember this. I remember this. And the truck was out in the field, and we had cattle, and the cows were all pushing against the truck because there was feed in the back of the truck. And I remembered being very frightened. It's like, oh my gosh, what if the truck rolls over? What if the cows eat me? I had this fear as a little toddler on the seat. And then my dad came and shooed the cows away and jumped in the truck and began to comfort me. And I thought, wow, I remember this. I remember this. I remember this as if it was yesterday, and I couldn't have been any older than 14 months old. That's when it hit me. I was experiencing myself at the age that Griffin, my toddler son, was when he left this realm. And all of a sudden it just hit me. Griffin, wow, I'm his age. I get it. And, you know, the truck went away, the cows went away, and my dad went away. And suddenly I was me, you know, now standing in that field with no truck or no cows. And I looked over, and here was this magnificent young man standing there. And I knew in an instant, it's Griffin. It's him. I recognized him. In some ways, it was like looking in a mirror. He was taller and stronger than me, but there he was, beautiful. And I wanted to rush to him. I wanted to run to him, and yet I was held back and wasn't able to. And he began this nonverbal communication. He just looked me in the eye. And he communicated to me, not with words, but he said, Dad, I wanted you to remember that. I wanted you to remember that so that you will always know that I'll always remember being your little boy in that time, in this life, when I was your little boy for those short few months beyond a year. And I'll never forget having you as my dad. Of course, you know, nothing could hold me back then. I rushed to him, and I held him, and boy, he hugged me. And again, it felt very physical, big, strong kid. And then he did lean in my ear, and he did whisper, and he did speak verbally. And he said, Dad, I have a message for you. And I thought, wow, a message from my boy from the other side. And he leaned in, and he whispered in my ear, and he said, Dad, here's the message. He said, I love you, and I'm proud of you. And I thought, wow, you know, what more profound message could there possibly be? And in fact, this happened shortly before I wrote the book. And it just gave me the courage to say, yep, put it out there. Put it out there. Share your experience, and people will heal. And there we did. But yeah, gosh, my wife Tamara has come. My wife Tamara has communicated through dreams and impressions and feelings to my current wife Tanya. I mean, we just have these angels around us, so that continues. What do you believe about reincarnation, multiple lives? Thank you, Jan. This is a fantastic question. I'm completely open to it. I mean, the sense I got on the other side was that I was eternal, that I am eternal, that I've always existed, that I have known things through eons. And I also get the impression, and my heart tells me, there's no end. We just keep going. So I totally embrace multiple lives, multiple experiences, multiple times. I also am very attuned to soul groups, if you will, contracts. Gosh, what are we doing before? My adopted son, and I only say that as a definition, Zach, my middle-sized son, but I want to share this because the adoption gives it some relevance. When he was just a little teeny, me and my wife were driving, and he was in his car seat. And you know, when they're, just kind of gazing out the window, and, they're watching things go by, and they almost get in that meditative state. And he couldn't have been any more than about three and a half years old. And he spoke up, and he said, Mom, he was speaking to Tanya, my wife. He says, Mom, do you remember when I was the dad of the family? And he was expounding on this memory or this recollection of when he had been the dad of that group, of our group, of however it is. But I totally embraced that. And although I was never shown a past life or anything, I've had profound experiences in my life where I'll be somewhere or I'll have something happen, and it's beyond a deja vu. It's almost like, wow, I've done this before, or I've been here before.